If you're in your 40s, you have several advantages to building wealth over a younger person, but you have one huge disadvantage to that 25-year-old, and that is you have less time for your money to compound, which means every single move you make in this decade needs to be precise. We are going to walk through a checklist of things you need to do with money in your 40s to ensure that when you're in your 50s and 60s, your life is full of financial abundance. In your 40s, there is no time to waste financially, so let's dive in. The first piece of maximizing money in your 40s involves making sure that your income is where it needs to be. This is a graph of percent wage growth by gender over a lifetime. You can see it varies a bit for men and women, but you're reaching some of those peak income earning years. For men, the peak is a little bit later, sometimes even in 50s, but in general, you're approaching those years where you should be earning more right now than you've ever earned in your life. Now, this data is across all fields, but it should be true as a medical professional as well for one primary reason. Your clinical skills and even your non-clinical medicine adjacent skills should be locked and loaded by this point. You should have a very good idea of for your specific profession, subspecialty, and location, what the bell curve looks like. And by this point in the time, you need to be at the 75th percentile or above. This is a random example of a pharmacist salary in New York. You can see that the median is 157,000, but you should be shooting for 168,000 or above by this juncture because you again should be a beast at your job. You should be very good professionally, and you should be in a position where you understand the business side of medicine, you understand billing, you understand mentorship, and you can align yourself really well with employer goals, which we'll talk about more in a minute. Now, in addition to recognizing the bell curve for where you're at, you also need to have a very clear understanding of your cost of living index of where you live and use very simple cost of living calculators on the internet to make sure that you are actually accommodating the cost of living index of where you're at. So, for example, if you're in a high cost of living area, you overcoming your cost of living index may look like a salary in the 85th percentile versus the 75th percentile to make up for an overall bell curve that doesn't accommodate cost of living. If you're not there, you need to negotiate. I have a whole negotiation system that I teach. I don't have time to walk through it in this video, but the core of it is you need to understand what your employer's goals are and align yourself with those. When you're thinking about what your employer's goals are, anything that is income generating or increases profit margins should be at the top of your list for them. So let's say you know your employer has a goal of mentoring XYZ new employees, increasing patients seen per day, increasing procedures billed, blah, blah, blah. When you write that list out, anything that directly translates to money goes at the top of it. And then you ask yourself, how can I directly contribute to those goals? How can I make sure that when I'm sitting down with my employer and I'm presenting the value equation of you pay me more, it has to start with I earn more for you, right? I align myself with your goals. And here's all of the ways that I'm going to continue to increase your profitability, which means you have money to pay me, right? Because at the end of the day, you can be incredibly valuable, but if the company doesn't have any profits, they can't pay you more, right? Money can't, come out of nothing. So as you're creating the conversation and your negotiation, framing it this way may not lead to an immediate yes, but it does put you in an excellent situation where you can actually sit down when you're doing this plan for a no, step 6, and go, okay, would you agree that if I accomplish these 5 objectives in the next 6 months, it would be worth a compensation increase of X percent? If those 1 through 5 things that you've talked through with your manager are in line with their company goals, that's a very hard thing to say no to. So sit at the table, negotiate your income up to that 75th percentile, and if you're way off base, it may be time to change jobs. There's a lot of data saying that it's much easier to secure a higher percent raise with negotiation when you change jobs versus staying at the same employer. By this time, you should be very marketable, and that shouldn't be a difficult thing for you to do. You can also increase your income in other ways, but the cool thing about it is you should be in a position of some security at this point. If you're wondering what the asterisks are on this is the asterisks are all of these side hustles that I've personally done. And so I say that to say, hey, look, there's a million ways to increase income. I've tried a lot of them. And so I have some experience personally on most of these. But some of them are really reserved for people who have clinical experience. Things like expert witness work and speaking for a pharmaceutical company or device tend to require 3 to 5 years of clinical experience. You should be able to do those at this point, but you also should be able to do some things that require capital, right? Like you've been in the financial game for a minute. Hopefully, we're in a position of security, which means things like starting a practice, buying investment real estate, even starting a company that might host CME conferences or courses. You're likely in a position where you can do some of these bigger needle moving things that may create more cash flow, but also require capital to get started. Now, if you're not there yet, that's okay. That's the purpose of this decade is to get there, but you should you should have more doors open. I'll put it that way because you not only have clinical experience, but again, you're also probably in a position of some level of financial security and you might have some capital to contribute to these types of things. The next thing to do is really focus on investing in income producing assets. Now, in your 20s and 30s, when I did that content, I really focused on investing in the stock bond market because there's no barrier to entry. The cost to get started is like 20 bucks, right? At this phase of the game, that may look different for you. It may look like investing in operating businesses. It may look like investing in real estate. Again, some of these other things that require a little bit of capital, but you may be in your 40s in a position to get started with those ventures. Now, from a stock bond standpoint, there's no time like the present. And of course, as you know, you have less time for that money to compound now than you did when you were in your 20s. So let's look at what happens throughout this decade from when you enter to when you end from a stock bond investing standpoint. Every dollar you invest at 40 will turn into $7 by the time you retire, assuming an 8% annual rate of return. By the middle of the decade, $1 invested turns into 5. By the time you exit this decade, $1 invested only turns into $3. And so you really need to leverage every single move you make with precision to make sure that you're optimizing your portfolio at the end. This is a time to pay incredible attention to your investing fees. These numbers here, $1 turns into 7, they assume that you are not investing in expensive, actively managed mutual funds with expense ratios greater than 1%. They assume you're not paying front load fees or back load fees on your transactions. They assume you're not paying a 1% assets under management fee to a financial advisor. If those things are true, these numbers are less, right? $1 doesn't turn into $7, then it turns into something less than that. So the precision with which you go to deploy every dollar has to be absolute at this point because your time horizon is so much shorter that you need to take advantage of every single opportunity for compounding returns. Now, just to make you go, ugh, as a reminder, when you were 25, every dollar you invested turned into 22. Okay, so in this decade, we're way, 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 way past that. And this is the nature of the beast, right? Investing in the stock bond market really favors the young, which is why I very aggressively invest for my 2-year-old. It may not be fair, but it's the truth. And so, especially if you're on the front half of this 40s decade, you need to be laser focused on if you're investing enough and if your investing fees are minimized. So, what does enough look like? So, let's look at middle of the decade metrics of where you should be from a stock bond standpoint. Now, this is an internal calculator I built called Are You on Track, right? Very creative. But I'll explain how it works. The top up here is your household income. Maybe that's you and a partner. This is your current balance invested across all accounts. The third line is your age. Down here, this is the amount you invest on an annual basis. And you'll see that as I show you different incomes for household, I've just adjusted this to represent you investing 20% of your income, whatever that income is. This down here, the second line from the bottom, this is what you would need to retire at 65, assuming a 2.5% annual inflation rate from now until then, and you replacing 80% of your income. If the bottom number is green, that means your estimated nest egg is bigger than what you'll need. Yay. If it is red, that means you're not on track. Now, I have shown you here, what does it mean for you to be on track? How much should you have invested right now? Well, if you earn that $100,000 in your household, you should have $475,000 invested by 45 to say that you're on track. Now, this does not mean, oh, I'll never invest again. I'm good to go. I can coast my way there. That's coast fire. That's something different. This is, if I just stay the course, if I keep investing 20% of my income, I'm going to hit the mark I need to hit. Now, what about if you earn 150,000? Right? The more you earn, the more money you need to have invested to replace the income. That's the nature of the beast. So if you earn 150,000, nothing else changes, you keep investing 20% of your income moving forward, then you should have 700,000 invested across all accounts for your household by 45 to be on track. If you have an income of 200,000, then you should have 920,000 invested at this point in order to say that you're on track at 45. Now, what if you're not there? Well, it's pretty simple. This assumes that you're going to be continuing to invest 20% of your income moving forward. If you don't have the current amount invested that says you're on track, all that means is that you're not going to be able to invest 20% of your income moving forward. It's going to have to be 25% or 30% or 35% because you're playing a little bit of catch up. Now, the third thing to do in your 40s is to stabilize cash reserves. We can't play around, right? In your 20s, you might have been flying around with a few $1,000s in the bank and you thought that was fine. But at this point, no such luck. Okay. You need 3 to 6 months expenses in a high yield savings account, ideally under the FDIC insurance limit, so your money is protected. If you have a dual income household, you can probably get away with 3 months of expenses. If you have a single earner and you've got a spouse and 4 kids that rely on you, you probably should lean towards 6. If you have job insecurity, meaning like you are on a contract or you have a position that might go away in a few years and you know that, you should lean towards 6 months. If you're actually moving into the retirement space, like in the next few years, you're planning to retire, you should be looking at 12 months of expenses. It's important at this point that you have that cash, you have that stability. And again, having that capital, that's the thing that allows you to do some of the cooler investing things we mentioned earlier. Now, at this point, you should have a clear debt strategy. And normally I would say, hey, the strategy isn't always get debt free, but the strategy does need to be you should be totally debt free when you move into retirement. Now, I would totally exclude investment real estate from that. I wouldn't say you need to be debt free from investment real estate to retire, but you should be totally debt free otherwise. And honestly, you should probably even be mortgage free otherwise. So keep that in mind, like have no mortgage on your primary residence. When you move into retirement, you should have minimal overhead. Now, the question of how to approach the debt depends on the type of debt and the interest rate. If you're facing credit card debt at this point, you're going to have to really take a lifestyle step back and address it immediately. I'm not a fan of applying the Dave Ramsey method of money to medical professionals, especially with student loan debt. But if your question is, how do I clear my credit card debt? Dave Ramsey is totally the answer, right? You have to really scale back on lifestyle, pause investing, and get it done. A lot of people don't want to pause investing because they feel like, oh, I know how important it is to invest at this point. My dollars still are powerful in my 40s more than they will be in my 50s, but the math doesn't support it. Here's an example. This person splits paying off credit card debt and investing on the left. This person on the right puts everything to the credit card debt and waits to invest. They come out ahead, and it is because you will not out earn in the stock market your interest rate on your credit card debt. You have got to pay it off. Now, again, for student loan debt, there's a tremendous strategy, right? You might be looking at taxable loan forgiveness, public service loan forgiveness, a state forgiveness program. If you're doing a standard payoff plan, you likely should be investing as you do it. This is an example, a mathematical example of why. The person at the top puts everything to student loans. The person at the bottom splits it, does a combo plan, and they come out ahead. Why? Because you'll earn more in the stock market over time than you will in pay and interest on your student loans. Very different case than the 27 or 30% interest rate credit card that you have, right? And so, regardless of how you approach this, you should not move into retirement with student loan debt. So time this out and figure out, based upon your student loan strategy, are you going to have all of that debt cleared by the time you move into retirement? This is something you should be thinking about at this phase of the money game. Now, this is true throughout all of life, and so I'm going to highlight it in this decade as well. If you let your overhead spiral out of control, it is very difficult to invest at the level you need to and build wealth at the level you need to ensure that you're not stuck working until you're 85. Okay? Rule of thumb, less than 20% of gross monthly income, pre-tax monthly income on housing. That is your rent, or that is your mortgage plus taxes and insurance plus HOA fees. Less than 8% of your household income take home pay should be going to car payments. Okay. And you need to make sure that you're not financing cars on 7-year notes, driving a new car off the lot, watching it instantly depreciate 20%, winding up upside down on the loan, paying for gap insurance. It's all crazy, right? Cars are just destructive to your personal financial life. And so you need to keep that in mind as you're deciding, what vehicle do I drive? It has to fit into the big picture. And the big picture is you need to build wealth, and cars don't do it. Now, at this point in the game as well, you really need to think about the tax strategy behind your investing. You should have 3 buckets of money from a tax standpoint. Now, if you don't know anything about investing at all, this is going to confuse you. Hopefully, you have some base knowledge. And if not, stick with us. We'll get you there. But you should have taxable money, you should have tax deferred money, and tax exempt money. So, the taxable bucket are things like your after tax brokerage account, where you're going to pay capital gains taxes when you go to sell. Now, fortunately, you can control your capital gains taxes to a point by controlling your income tax bracket in retirement. Some people can even get their capital gains down to 0% if their income's low enough. But for a lot of folks, it'll be 15%, which is still less than what you're paying on your income from your job. So, pretty darn good from a taxation standpoint, in a bucket that's important for you to have. You should have tax deferred money, which means this is like traditional 401k or 403b contributions where you saved on taxes when you made the contribution, but you're getting taxed at ordinary income tax brackets when you take this money out. Now, most of us will face required minimum distributions in the future as well, which means that some of this tax deferred bucket is going to be not under your control, right? You're going to have an RMD out of this account, and that's going to dictate in some ways what your income tax bracket becomes. You should also have a tax exempt bucket or money you can access tax free. This is going to come from your Roth IRA. It can also come from a health savings account that you've invested if you're using the money for qualifying expenses. By having tax diversification at this phase of the game, you allow yourself to control your taxes as much as possible when you move into retirement. If you don't have the three buckets, you force yourself into a path where you have very little control over what your tax situation looks like. For example, if the only investment account you have is a 401k and you made traditional contributions your whole working years, you have very little control of what happens on the back end, right? Your RMD dictates most everything. You're going to pay taxes on everything at ordinary income tax brackets, which you don't have, again, a lot of control over in retirement, despite the fact that you're not working. So keep in mind at this point, you should be investing in a tax diversified way to ensure that when you do shift into retirement, you have some levers to pull to control the tax situation. If you do all these things, if you maximize your income, you start using some wealth building modalities or side hustles that are really honestly reserved for people with some experience and some capital. You maximize your stock bond situation, you've got your overhead under control, and you're investing in a tax diversified and fee minimized way. You ensure that your 50s and 60s are the reaping years, right? Where you get to sit back, kind of coast, relax, and enjoy all the hard work that you've put into date. If you haven't done these things yet, now is the time to get to work to make sure that you can enjoy the last few decades of your working life and not be stressed about getting caught up financially.